Dana Seeger here for the School of Visual Philosophy. Today's kitchen table session is going to be pamphlet bookbinding. The materials we're going to need for today's pamphlet binding kitchen table session is, first we want a cover page. So this is just a thicker watercolor paper that I've done a print on. You can leave it blank, you can use existing paper. The one thing that I would recommend is that it's a little bit thicker or heavier, like cardstock, than your inside papers. That way it'll give it a little bit more durability. The inside papers can be regular sketchbook paper, they can be even copy paper. This book, I decorated the pages first and then bound it, and by all means you could certainly do that. You just have to let the papers dry. I painted these with acrylic and collage and let them dry, and then bound them with the cover and the pamphlet stitch. So you'll need your cover paper. You can also use leather. You can use fabric. The leather and the fabric won't be as stiff. They'll have a little bit more floppiness, but that can be okay. You will need your inside paper, which, like I said, could be copy paper. This is like sketchbook paper, so it's a little bit thicker or heavier weight than traditional copy paper. You also need to have some type of thread. So this is traditional linen thread that you use for bookbinding. It's very strong. It's a little bit thinner than traditional embroidery floss, but you could also use embroidery thread. This is a mercerized cotton thread. This is embroidery floss, so it's a little bit thicker. It's multi-strand, so you have multiple strands woven, kind of wound up together that you could separate if you wanted to, or you can leave them a little bit thicker, wound together for a different look. If you use the traditional linen thread, this is what it will ultimately look like. So it kind of just disappears and lets the cover show. If you wanted something with a little more accent, you could, or contrast, you could use the embroidery thread in any color that you wanted to. You will also need, or I recommend using, a piece of cardboard. This is just from a box that I cut off, and some kind of punch, because you will be punching holes through the whole signature, which is all the pages that you folded together. You'll be punching holes through it. Some kind of needle, scribe like this works really well to punch through, and or you could use the needle that you're going to be using for your thread, for your binding. This is just a tapestry needle. It's a little bit dull though, and so for poking a hole, I wouldn't recommend it. An awl would work, and a sewing awl or a leather awl looks something like this. It's just a pointy end. Sometimes they taper a little bit more, so you have a bigger hole. You don't really need a big hole, you just need to punch a hole through it. So something sharp that you could poke a hole with. Your sewing needle for putting the threads through the paper, and having a cardboard piece to punch into is really helpful so they don't damage the table or the work surface that you're on. So first thing we're going to do, once we've chosen our cover sheet, cover paper is folded in half, and if you're making this for yourself, it doesn't really matter how big you make it. If you're going to make a little sketchbook or like a travel journal, then having something that will fit in your hand is really nice. But make sure that the proportions are right. So if you have your paper and you fold it in half and it's too thin, or it looks too narrow and looks kind of funny, then choose a paper or trim it down so that when you fold it, it looks like it has a nice proportion to it. So fold your cover paper in half, and then if your binding paper, your inside paper, is the same size, then that works great. If you need to cut it down, I would recommend making your inside paper maximum the size of your cover so it doesn't stick out the cover. If you make it a little bit smaller, then that will also help when you go to fold it so that it doesn't stick out when it's folded, because it does kind of, the inside papers kind of push out. You can always trim that later with either a razor blade, box cutter, or scissors, so you don't have to worry too much about that, but trim your paper so that it's approximately even with the cover sheets. And then you'll fold each of those in half. If it's thick like this, then I'll just fold them in half separately. And each group of pages, if you're going to be binding, say a case-bound book, you'll have multiple folded groups of pages together that you'll be sewing each together. And each one of those groups is called a signature. But for this pamphlet binding, we're just going to do one signature. So there's only one group of folded pages. It can be a good amount of pages. This one's got like 6 pages that are folded in half. But if you start to get too many, then it's hard for the binding to stay connected, and it also starts to get disproportionate when you start folding it. So maybe keep like 2 pages to 8 pages for your signature. So I've got 4 pages that I'm going to create my signature with. And if you are making just a blank journal, then it doesn't really matter which order you put them in. But you can see that if you're making a book ahead of time and you're either printing the pages so you want them to read in a particular order, then you'll definitely want to create the pages, each page, with the idea that the first page is number 1, and then the other folded edge is going to be the last page. So this would be number 1, this would be number 8, this would be number 2 here, and then because it's folded in half, this would be number 9, 8, 3, and so on. So I would make a mock-up, which is like sort of a dummy version or something that you can just create, do your numbering system, and make sure that you have each page in the correct order before you do all your printing or your book creation. But since we're just making a simple journal right now, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to fold them all together, slide them into each other, so I have one group of pages. Now I'm going to start punching the holes so that I can bind them together with the pamphlet stitch. So because I've got this nice fold, a pencil is also really helpful, especially if you're a first timer, to measure where your holes are going to be. You want them to look as even and nice as possible. You also don't want your holes to be too close to the edge of the book, because then they might run the risk of tearing and slipping out. So I would recommend at least 3/4 of an inch to an inch from the edge is where you're going to do your first hole punch. And then for a book this size, you only need 3 holes. If you wanted to make it more decorative or have a slightly different pattern, you could do more holes. But for this one, we're just going to do 1 directly in the middle, and then 2 on the edges, about 3/4 of an inch from the edge of the book pages. So I'm just going to eyeball it, but like I said, you can measure it, especially if this is your first time. So on the opening, I've got all my pages together. I'm going to open them up, try to keep them as together as I can, because once you poke the hole, you'll want to make sure that they don't move around and shift. I'm going to do the middle, and then I'm going to do the bottom. You can use a paper clip or a binder clip to keep the pages together if it helps, especially if you have a lot of pages. But once you have those marked, you're going to slide your cardboard underneath the book pages. And again, keep them as close as you can together. You'll also be doing the same thing to the cover. You're going to punch a hole all the way through pages. So now you should be able to look on the back side and see a little hole punched through there. Now we're going to put our cover, and whichever side you want to be I think I'll do this side as the front cover. I'm going to lay my signature on the cover, and because I've already got my holes, I'm just going to go back and punch back through and punch all the way through my cover as well. Because with this method, it all gets bound together at the same time. So now that I have my holes, I can start sewing. I'm going to use this slightly contrasty thread because I think it would look pretty. And when you're measuring how much thread to use, you're going to be going back over the direction multiple times. So you want to make sure you have enough. So if you start at the top and give yourself a little tail, and then double your amount, so double the height of the book, and then I always add kind of like a half as an extra, because you'll be tying it off, and it helps to have a little bit more when you tie it off, and then cut it a little bit shorter. So you'll be cutting the string double with another 1/2 to 3/4 of the height of the book. Okay, so now we're going to start sewing. We have our signatures all together with our cover, and they're all still aligned with the holes. And I've threaded my needle so that there's no knot, and because we'll be tying that at the end. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the middle hole on the inside of the book. So I'm just going to go down. And you can see I've poked it all the way through. And as I pull my needle through, I'm going to leave a tail about like that. And you can go up to the top or down to the bottom for the next step. I'm going to go up to the top. And I'm going to go now from the back side and poke it up through the hole to the inside. And you just want to pull just so that it's snug. You can hold the middle if you want. You don't want to like pull it so tight that it tears the pages. And then you're going to skip the middle hole and go down into the bottom hole, all the way through the back. Pull through gently, and then you're going to go back up through the middle hole. And now we're going to tie off, so that will secure the book together. So all the signatures will stay, or the one signature page will stay together. And then because you've got this long stretch, what we're going to do when we tie it is one of these threads is going to go underneath that, and one of them is going to stay probably we have on either side. And then when we tie our square knot, it will catch that middle long thread and keep it together. And again, you don't want to tie it or pull it too tightly. The idea is not to have it tear the pages, but what you really want is to just keep them from falling apart. The square knot is just one side over and then through, and then the other side over and through. And then we have these long kind of tails which we can trim down. If you have a really thick signature, you can even take it through the top hole or back through the hole, but right, this one I'm just gonna trim it. So the middle will have a little bit of that. And that's a basic pamphlet stitch. So go make tons of little sketchbooks and journals. Now I get to go write and decorate it. I love using extra papers, extra fun cardstock, prints that I don't really want to keep as prints, but that would make a nice cover. You can rubber stamp, you can paint, you can collage, you can journal. Possibilities are endless. So, thanks for watching.